Well, big budget announcement just ahead of the 2024 general elections. Big capital, massive outlays, especially for the infrastructure and also agri sector as well. But to speak to us about sector specific, we are joined in by panelists, excellent panelists. In fact, if I could go across to my first guest over here, joining us here on NDTV, Mr. Ravindra Pai, who is the managing director of Century Real Estate Holdings Private Limited. Well, of course, I first would like to know if there was something at all that you expected, as far as the budget is concerned, the 2023 budget, and something that's not really been given for the real estate sector.
Well, I don't need to reiterate the fact that real estate happens to be one of the large sectors, the second biggest employer in the country after agriculture, big source of FDI inflow. Hoping that the target is for the sector to become a $1 trillion sector by 2030. So obviously there were a lot of expectations. Some of them being rationalization in GST rates in the sense that it came down from 12% to 5%, but we have not been able to claim input tax credit. Uh, besides that. We were also expecting some tax concessions for first time home buyers, maybe some hike in tax deduction
Yeah, though it's called
for
as middle class budget, we do not see,
home
but
buyers. So
yeah.
many of these things were expectations. So considering this, most of my peers or my industry colleagues may be a little bit disappointed that there's not been as much mention about real estate.
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, apart from the one, the Prime Minister Awas Yojana, where the outlay for affordable homes has gone up from 48,000 crores to about 79,000 crores. So that's a substantial 66% increase in outlay. But besides that, we didn't really hear too much. But I mean, for me, the takeaway has been that a large amount of focus has been on capital expenditure. And I think this, in some way, will have some sort of a spillover effect into real estate.
But
There's
what do you think, could have actually, what are the measures that could have actually, helped the sector?
Well, I mean, we were expecting things like financing for real estate sector. The last budget we saw the Swami Fund, which was created specifically for distressed assets.
Mhm.
We were hoping something around that line. If there was a particular fund that could have been created for real estate financing, because well, I mean, real estate is a very specific asset class, right? I mean, we feel that many banks don't tend to sort of understand this. And that's another long-standing demand of the industry was to really get an industry status wherein banks can treat real estate or at least affordable homes as a priority, priority lending. That's something that obviously we didn't see it happen. But like I said, I mean, there is capital, outlay on capital
Yeah.
expenditure. Urban planning is something that the government, I mean, the finance minister did emphasize on. So some of these things we hope, and also with the tax slabs really coming down, we're hoping that there'll be more disposable income in individuals, and I
Individual.
and I would suppose that this would really incentivize them to really get into some asset creation and buy their first home.
Okay. Just let me go across to Mr. Naganand Doreswamy, who's the managing partner of Idea Spring Capital. What you would like to talk about the startup ecosystem, because we've already been talking about the winter funding, and then also in terms of, though there is a little push in terms of infrastructure, is that going to be any help at all for startup ecosystem? And also, what about the capital gains, which we all were looking at?
Yeah, so I think in this budget, I should say the impact on the startups is muted. It was There are some references made to COEs, in both in pharma, in AI, and also in 5G. I think those things will definitely help. But some of the major areas where we are looking for inputs from in the budget was stay in India checklist, domiciling of startups outside of India, and I think those are related to some aspects of ease of doing business and taxation, both from capital gains as well as what taxes and the VCs pay in terms of their expenses and so on and so forth. There was few expectations. I don't think those are addressed in the budget.
Since
Hopefully,
I believe, yes, since these were some of the pre-budget expectations, unfortunately, that's not clearly been done. But what does this mean since it's not been addressed? What would be the impact?
I mean, we are trying to keep our startups in India. I mean, you have seen startups coming domiciling back into India, but still, a lot of tech startups are still domiciling outside of India, and that's not good for the country. And hopefully, it'll be taken into consideration, and you'll start fixing that. Even ease of doing business. I know we talked about DigiLocker and KYC changes that would make it easier for
Yes.
people not to have. Hopefully, those things will start helping the fund managers as well. But in terms of startups running by themselves, I don't think there's a whole lot of ease of doing business that we heard in the budget today. And we'll wait and watch what happens in the next month or so, what additions will be made, and also other reference of in terms terms of R&D investments, there's not much was said because we are hoping that innovation we know is the backbone for anything that can happen in the country. But in terms of we are hoping that industries could invest in funds or industries could invest in research and get credit for that.
But there was something that was talked about, in terms of upskilling and the research labs.
But upskilling is like employability, right? That will help startups indirectly because when you hire people, they are potentially they are productive from day one. So that will help the industry in general, and startup is part of the industry, so it will also benefit from those things. But I was focusing more on those specifically that can help startups. But more can be done, and hopefully we'll see more coming our way.
Not really much up to the expectations as far as startup is concerned. Of course, let's hear from the auto sector here, Mr. T.R. Parshuraman, the executive advisor of Toyota Kirloskar. How does the auto sector view this particular budget?
Yeah, this budget, it's a very welcome budget, I would say, given the current situation. Because Make in India and Atmanirbhar is what the Honorable Prime Minister is attempting. So, given that, I think the huge spend on infrastructure has a multiplier effect on various competitivenesses, labor competitiveness, because skill building is going to come in a big way across center of excellence, 36 center of excellence across the country. Then logistics competitiveness is going to increase. You have a huge outlay on railway infrastructure, 2.4 lakh crores, and 10 lakh crores coming on the infrastructure development. So plug and play parks, port connectivity, the end-to-end connectivity, this is going to create a huge paradigm shift across the country. Then skill building is going to take a huge dimension because we are going to create center of excellence across the country, and 5G, 100 5G labs across the country, and digital transformation is going to be the key player. And the bottom of the pyramid is the foundation is the MSME. So there is a thrust coming in terms of MSME development, be it the credit guarantee to the tune of 20,000 crores. I think this would really help them and reduce the borrowing cost by 1%. So this is going to have a huge impact on Make in India, and I'm sure this will propel the manufacturing in India, also aided by a lot of import duty cuts on, lithium-ion battery components, mobile components. So this is really a fillip. Added to that, the renewable energy, 35,000 crores is being spent on the energy transition, and hydrogen, mission is also a very, very big move. So all these things will compound, and added to the scrapping policy. I think this will really benefit a lot because 9 lakh vehicles, what was announced in the last budget, I think this will now get implemented, the government vehicles and the ambulances in all the states and the center. So this is definitely a very strong budget for manufacturing and Make in India.
So you were talking about the scrapping policy, right? Is it also a way where, it has been a dull period in terms of because of the pandemic, right? Does all of these, what's been done by the government right now, the budget, is it going to actually add that fillip and a push and help the sector revive?
Absolutely. In fact, PLI schemes was a great booster to the manufacturing. I think we gained a tremendous success in PLI schemes in every sector. I think, in fact, this would really compound the growth of manufacturing. Today, we are talking about the latest economic survey. At 17% of the gross GDP, manufacturing has grown. I think we are looking at 25% to 30% in the next decade when we compare ourselves with China, the leading Western countries. So I'm sure the manufacturing GDP will double in the next decade very easily through these activities.
True. I mean, it's not just the infrastructure outlay that we're talking about. Big push has also been, especially for the agriculture sector. Joining us here on NDTV is Mr. C.M. Patil, the CEO of Krishi Kalpa Agriculture Sector. So, what is it like? I believe that this is one sector other than the manufacturing that's received a huge outlay.
Very true. I think I'm pretty satisfied, I would say, from an overall budget perspective, what agriculture has got to share, particularly in the announcement of accelerated fund, which was not heard earlier. What I've not heard is what is the quantum, but I'm sure in the coming days we'll get to know. But at least this will again a huge investment opportunity for a lot of youngsters to start a value addition chain in the agriculture sector, and which can actually contribute to export as well as the secondary processing centers. And then the millets, the 2023 is going to be that particular. So making that as a contributor is a great boon, I would say. Also, the specifically in Karnataka, where the about 5,000 crores funds have been announced for a drought region area, which is a good plus from that particular sector. Of course, we know it's an election year; should that could be a possibility as well. Uh, and also, I see a good plus in the way how a lot of agritech startups are seeing the momentum there. So, technology getting the downstreams with the small things is going to get a lot more push, I would say.
Yes, in fact, that's something which I actually have heard from a lot of venture capitalists and industry analysts. What they were talking about, though, this is a funding winter, and it's a very tough time, especially for the startup ecosystem. One positive impact has been especially for the agri startups.
Absolutely.
Right.
See, because the reason because tech alone can't diversify this entire because we need to empathize the farming community, and this fund from government, what has been announced, is going to be a big boost for the agri-tech startups and also youngsters who are wanting to start something in these processing centers. So I
Right.
see that as a great boon over there. What I would wanted to see was we have got about 20,000 plus FPOs. So I don't know whether they're considering FPOs acceleration as well. So if at all that consider that would be a great
So
addition.
that's not a clarity at all.
We don't have a clarity on that. But what I would insist probably the change policymakers would be that they have to consider FPO's acceleration program as well because we've got so many FPOs in the country, but hardly there are very less or a handful of them in the country who are doing pretty good. I think if an emphasis has been given on accelerating FPOs, will actually help the startups as well as the farming community. They have an ability, they have a role to play, a kind of catalyst role which can actually connect the tech startups versus the farmers. So I see as a, in all, I think it's a fairly good budget. I would say from an agri sector perspective.
True, because in the next 12 months, like how we heard, it's going to be a very tough time because of the economic turmoil. Of course, we're going to see the agri startups going to pick up during this particular time.
Absolutely.
Yes, now just going across to, in fact, healthcare sector. What's really benefiting healthcare sector? Joining us, Mr. Rahul, the CFO of GE Healthcare. What are your takeaways?
So it's been a balanced budget, I'd say. The healthcare industry is going to see a benefit from a lot of the R&D and high-tech measures that we saw. So R&D, particularly in the pharma side, announcement of the 5G labs, AI Center of Excellence, all of this will have a cascading impact on the healthcare side. The nursing, training institutes, 157 of them, provides first line of defense really that we sorely need. Um, that said, one would have hoped that the growth trajectory on healthcare spend that we saw during the COVID years would continue because that's become a heightened focus.
It looks like that's come to an abrupt end, right?
Right. So I think that said, a lot of the pillars of this budget are focused on areas that have a direct healthcare agenda. So if you think of the Saptarishi, for instance, having last mile infrastructure and investment, youth empowerment and skilling, inclusion, access. So all of these have direct healthcare agendas attached to them, and one can hope that as this gets crystallized and really the delivery and execution starts, that the healthcare sector starts to see a benefit of it. Also, the benefit of the capex spends and infrastructure spends, how much of that is really allocated to healthcare, growing the capex cycle, because hospitals and the last mile delivery is very capex intensive, right? So, how do we encourage and incentivize our care providers to really grow the capex is going to be critical.
Okay, so because since not really much of focus has been given, especially for the healthcare sector, what are the challenges that's going to be up until next year?
So I think it's going to be really incentivizing that capex, like I mentioned. I think one is both on the caregiver side, the hospitals and care providers, how they're reaching capacity. So how do they expand the beds available to patients? Second would be on the manufacturing side.
I want to know, will that be a burden on the healthcare sector to manage on its own?
I think private investment, given the high interest rate cycle, is going to be a bit burdened. Let's see how much of that infra spend gets on the government side gets translated into public healthcare spend. I think on manufacturing as well, given the strong start on PLI, both on the pharma side and on medical device side, could have seen a bit of deepening of that PLI scheme towards deeper local content, higher manufacturing outputs. All of that would have helped the sector become a lot more competitive, both domestically as well as for exports.
Okay, so quite a lot of mixed opinions from various sectors. Now, would like to move to especially the education sector, one of the most important GDPs for the country. It should ideally be as far as the NEP policy is concerned. Was it up to the mark? what the educators, or for that matter the education sector expected?
So the education sector itself, as we understand it, serves to make its goals for the youth of India. India is the youngest country in the world. We have an 50% of our population under the age of 25. So given that that's the importance, perhaps what was missed was the budget allocation for education. Our marker is supposed to be 6%, and we are yet to see that meeting that marker. Having said that, we do see that there's an upward trend. 2014 we saw it at 2.8, and today we're seeing it at 3.1. So our hope is that that trend continues.
Okay, so what are the policy changes are you looking at, because with this the 2023 budget?
The
Main
perhaps
fact of it.
the most interesting facet that the Honorable FM brought forward was the idea of the District Institute of Education and Teaching, Education and Training, which looks to train our educators. 38,000 teachers trained in Eklavya model schools, which again was perhaps the first time it's been mentioned in the union budget, along with the notion of the culture of reading, which was also mentioned. The digital library is something that we're looking forward to, including concepts of capacity building among teachers.
Yes.
These are what we're looking forward to.
Oh, any challenges that you would say you would talk to us about in terms of that was not really focused on and that you would face for the next 1 year or so until it goes to election?
So I think in the Indian higher education system, a rich research ecosystem is necessary for us to be at the frontiers of knowledge, of creating knowledge. And if that's going to be an important goal for us to meet, then we need to make sure that our budget allocations reflect that.
Well, thank you. That was Mrs. Kiran Pai, the Pro Chancellor of Vidyashilp Educational Group. In fact, mixed opinions we're getting, but however, the massive push, what we continue to see has been especially in the infrastructure sector and the agri sector as well. With Kumar in Bengaluru, Srijappa, NDTV.